I have spent a great deal of time and thought considering why it is that we seem to accept violence towards children, and also to some extent towards women, without question, so that the same acts performed against a child that would be considered an assault if they were performed against an adult are accepted as normal. And I think the roots of this kind of thinking go very, very far back in Western ideology and tradition. If you go back to biblical references, you can see that children were treated very much as their parents' property. And Aristotle, who is a philosopher who wrote extensively about the whole concept of justice, actually says that there is no such thing as injustice towards children, because children are parts of our own bodies, and since there can be no injustice towards oneself, there can be no injustice towards one's child. So you can see that the concept that children are a part and parcel, our possession, coming out of the parent's body, seems to give a license to violence that would not exist if the child were viewed as a separate individual rather than a personal possession. The legal system in America is in a process of development and evolution. We have begun to accept that children have rights and that children need to be treated as individuals. However, we don't have to go very far back in legal history to find examples of ways in which children were indeed treated as the property of their parents. Children have been an important asset of the family. Historically, children were used to work. They were put to work by the family members, and their wage packets were paid directly to their parents. Parents were legally entitled to collect their children's wages. Historically, if you go back in the traditions of marriage, fathers could bestow their daughters on the proper suitor. A daughter was in some sense a possession to be given from the father to the family of the new husband. And in many ways, children functioned within a family both as a means to create new wealth and as a means to transmit wealth from one generation to another. So you can see that the concept, the roots of treating children as a means to an end rather than as individuals are fairly firmly entrenched in our ways of thinking about the family. The family has been structured in Western society along the lines of a patriarchy. And by this I mean an organization in which there is a leader, a head of the household, and that head was traditionally and legally so the father, the husband and father. One of the outcomes of this arrangement, when it was abused, when this power was abused, was a power of the husband and father not only over the life of his children, but also over the life of his wife, control of her property. There are some fascinating discussions when you look back at the history of attempts to protect children's rights and to emphasize the need to educate children and to train children rather than exploit them in the labor market. In the 1920s and 30s, the United States Congress was debating the Child Labor Amendment, which would have made it possible for laws to be passed throughout the country prohibiting child labor, which of course we do now have. This was during a period when prohibiting child labor was considered tremendously controversial. It was considered an inroad on the sanctity of the family, taking away the rights of parents to control the upbringing of their children. And there's a wonderful statement by a man responding quite angrily to the concept of a child labor amendment. He says, first they took our women, then they took our liquor, talking about prohibition and the women's vote being passed. Now they're trying to take our children. So you can see that this philosophy that men particularly have ownership rights over women and children is really quite a recent phenomenon. It's still with us, very much with us in the rhetoric and discussions whenever children's rights are raised as a restraint or constraint on the powers of parents. in terms of defining children as property, I'm not trying to say that the child is a piece of property. That simply wouldn't be true as a matter of law. I am saying that if we examine critically the legal rules that have applied to family relationships, we will see that children are treated very much in a way that is analogous to property. One of the great philosophers and legal scholars who tried to define what is a property interest was a gentleman named Hofeld. And in the Hofeldian scheme, there are a number of rights that come together to define property interests. Examples include the right to control, the right to exclusive possession, the right to exploit in a financial or economic sense. Certainly someone who owns a piece of land has the right to exploit that land, to exclude other people from trespassing on that land, to sell that land to someone else. These are the rights of property ownership. Looking at the rights that parents have under the law, the right to exclude other persons from associating with one's own child, the right to control the child's whereabouts, to have custody of the child. These are all part of the parental rights. The right to, historically, to put the child to work and collect the child's wage packet, exploit the child's economic value, indenture the child, apprentice the child. All of these were part of the parental rights concept. And in fact, the right to transfer the child to someone else. Historically, when a father made out his will, his last will and testament, one of the things he could include in it was a transfer after his death of custody of his children to someone other than their mother, for example, a brother or a sister of the father. The father had the right, literally, to transfer the children, the property interest in the children at his death. So if we examine critically the laws and rules about children, you can see that in effect, we are quite used to them, we take them for granted, but in effect they give almost a property ownership over children to the adults who have legal rights. Now, however, all too frequently, in terms of justifying acts of violence against children, you will see people say, this is my child, I can do what I want with it. I remember hearing one woman say, I brought this child to life and I can send him to the cemetery. I had a South African student, a woman who was a distinguished professor and judge, who told me about sitting in a court proceeding in an African tribal court and having one of the defendants, a defendant who had been accused of incest, of rape of his own child, say, isn't it better to take to take cattle from one's own corral, justifying that if he was going to assault a child, it should be his own child because that would make it better.